January 6, 2021. On this day, a mob gathered outside and within the walls of the U.S. Capitol building. Protesters assembled in an effort to stop Congress from convening to count the electoral votes that would confirm President Joe Biden's 2020 presidential election victory. Various costumes and tools were represented at these riots, including images from our history, snippets of the ancient Greek and Roman world that we as America so closely resemble. Classical images included allusions to Roman general Julius Caesar, Greek soldier helmets, and a flag with the Greek phrase molon labe, which translates to come and take the weapons. The borrowed images during the Capitol riots demonstrate how historically ancient Greece and Rome were based upon the idolization of war, leading to many civil wars and wars conducted in displays of power. However, images such as those at the Capitol riots distort the historical record, as rioters were using ill-understood slogans from the classical world. If we as an educational community surrender the classics to those who weaponize it, we lose the true historical record. We surrender the field if we don't change the way that we teach and learn from the classics, leaving the ancient world unguarded to exploitation. Take January 6 during the Capitol riots. The Caesarian rhetoric, the cry of defiance molon labe, and the soldier costumes. The famous phrase, crossing the Rubicon, references Julius Caesar's decision to cross the Rubicon River, with this action leading to his forceful seizure of Rome and starting a civil war. The civil war would end with Julius Caesar becoming dictator. At the January 6 Capitol riots, protesters displayed this rhetoric, crossing the Rubicon, urging President Trump to cross the Rubicon, bringing Julius Caesar's use of force to advance his political career into a modern reference that focuses only on dangerous ambition, rather than historical context and consequences. Spartan helmets are sometimes used to take us back to the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, using the movie 300, referencing the moment when the Spartans delayed the Persians to buy Greek forces time. The movie shows the Spartans portrayed by fair-skinned actors, versus the Persians who were portrayed by people of color. The Battle of Thermopylae, referenced in this use, shifts from an impressive and honorable display of courage and valor into a battle of the races. At the Capitol riots, protesters dressed in Spartan helmets, some decorating their helmets with various messages. The phrase molon labe also historically references the Battle of Thermopylae, conveying the defiant tone of when Spartan king Leonidas challenged and dismissed Xerxes' demand for the Spartans to surrender their weapons. It has been used in the modern day to convey the same challenge and dismissal of King Leonidas, but in reference to gun rights. In this image, the right black flag displays the phrase molon labe. This picture is from the 2018 Minnesota Capitol protest. A similar flag was flown at the U.S. Capitol riot, as seen on the Washington Post livestream, and is often seen at protests. American history is an extension of ancient Greece and Rome, and people continually use these ancient examples of history in times of violence and defiance, staking a claim to the classics. The question is, why? Classics is an inherently flawed field. These pieces of history are to an extent accurately representing the classical world. Ancient Rome and Greece cultivated societies built upon slavery, the idolization of patriarchal values, and the power-hungry virtues that led to perpetual colonization and the need to continually expand and conquer. The Greco-Roman world leaves behind a legacy with the fundamental ideas of an honorable and timeless society, but one specifically of whiteness. Pharos is a webpage dedicated to documenting and educating about examples of appropriation of the Greco-Roman world, and they describe the relationship between an identity and the classical world, specifically a white identity. White supremacist appropriations of Greco-Roman antiquity depend on many errors and distortions of the historical record. Yet, these core beliefs correspond to many of the unexamined beliefs about the ancient world that many people, including classical scholars, already hold. Exploitation of ancient history is not only a problem outside of the field, as seen in the Capitol riots, but also within the field. This problem occurs because we put classics on a pedestal and treat the ancient world as having perfect, great, and idealistic societies. It's been sitting on that pedestal for decades, and it sits untouched. In creating such stagnancy, we diminish the value of the field by only reinforcing the problematic nature of classical history. And if we leave behind the field and stop teaching classics, we lose understanding of both America's history and ideals and the origins of such problematic beliefs within current society. We need to strive to change how we view the field. The value of classics is in the dynamic and timeless nature of the field. Classics is a lens from the past that lets us better understand the history we carry with us today in the present. There are universal human issues within the ancient world that we still grapple with today, and the subject sheds light on the history of our own country. For example, President Coolidge was an avid Latin and Greek scholar who regularly employed classical techniques within his political career. In his autobiography, he attributed his understanding of history in the past and the present to his classical education, saying, "Something in the sequence of history was revealed to me so that I began to understand the significance of our own times and our own country." Our understanding of how classical civilization unites us is fundamental to understanding the values of our shared American identity. The Founding Fathers based their thinking off of Demosthenes and Cicero. Classics can be used to bridge divides and create common ground not only within our American communities, but across nations, as a classical education is core to many systems. So, let's not cancel classics, but we can't keep it how it is. Let's expand classics to be more accessible, invite more voices into the conversation, and modernize our understanding of America's classics. My first encounter with the changing identity of classics was in my Latin 4 class sophomore year, when I wrote an essay on Virgil's Aeneid, a poem that justifies colonization through the main character Aeneas' destiny to found Latium. I remember asking for a copy of Homer's Odyssey because I wanted to examine Homer's writing about a male epic hero who's been idolized and remembered throughout literature. I was using the Aeneid to further examine the female queen Dido, who is central to Aeneas' journey, and how Virgil incorporates certain virtues within his description of Dido, in order to invoke heroic images within her character arc, but also sexism around the capabilities of a female character to govern and lead. An older classmate loaned me her copy of Professor of Classical Studies Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey, and as she grabbed it from her room, she said, "You can totally borrow it for however long you need." But she urged me to note the uniqueness of the translation, as she added that this copy was interpreted by Emily Wilson, and it's been coined as a feminist interpretation. In 2017, after about 60 English translations, Professor Emily Wilson became the first woman to translate the Odyssey into English. As a female, she exposed and challenged patriarchal values and gender norms that are rooted within the ancient text, considering the deep power of words that can change a narrative. She also took care to maintain the integrity of the piece by avoiding the new incorporation of contemporary issues of sexism. While striking a balance between her female identity in this ancient piece of literature and a piece published by The Guardian, Wilson wrote, "Female translators often stand at a critical distance when approaching authors who are not only male, but also deeply embedded in a canon that has for many centuries been imagined as belonging to men." Wilson embodies the contemporary push to redefine the identity of classics by reframing the ancient narrative in the Odyssey to make the field more inclusive for scholars and readers. She forces us to reconsider a foundational aspect of classics, not only within one of the most famous texts of the classics curriculum, but also as we move forward, reading and translating literature within the canon. The fight to defend history against exploitation is an issue rooted within the field of classics, but it extends to expose societal issues. When I asked Associate Professor of Classics Andromaki Karanika about the problematic nature of classics, she wrote back, "Some of the problems that classics has been facing within recent years are at its core systemic issues within U.S. academia that extend past Latin and Greek classrooms to address racism, classism, elitism, sexism within our communities. The motion to redefine the identity of classics has spearheaded a fight that goes far beyond the discipline. Within our educational systems, other authors have taken steps to exercise their influence on modernizing America's classics. In my school's sophomore grade-wide read, Homefire by Camilla Shamsi, as an epigraph, she displayed a quote from Sophocles' play Antigone. Quote, "The ones we love are enemies of the state." Sophocles. In Homefire, Shamsi pulls on an exploration of identity, engaging young readers on a journey from America to Britain to Pakistan, while bringing in recent history and news through a modern version of Antigone and the rise of ISIS. In a book that I read last fall, Toni Morrison's book Home, on the back, Morrison deliberately compares Frank to Homer's ancient story of the Odyssey. Frank is a modern Odysseus returning to a 1950s America mined with lethal pitfalls for an unwary black man. Morrison takes on a more recent memory of the 1950s with her main character Frank, a young black veteran recently home from the Korean War. She pulls on our connection to our collective American history and identity to bring a story from the classics into a modern age. These two authors incorporate stories from the ancient world, making the foundational ideals of classics more tangible and real for the 21st century. And they truly encompass the ancient world by bringing to life America's classics in non-traditional settings and characters. In the end, a balance must be struck to recognize how ancient cultures and languages contribute to society, but also acknowledge how they reinforce some of contemporary society's more harmful tendencies. Questioning ancient values reshapes the classics' identity by helping confront elitism and making a predominantly white male field more inclusive. In many cases, re-examining the classics with a wider lens sheds light on the structural biases that create inequalities within the field. If the classics are to survive, fresh interpretations must be welcomed. To properly carry on the ancient tradition of language and society, diversity encourages people to question their biases when considering the study of the ancient world in modern times. Without fresh eyes, we teach these texts in our classroom the same way we've been teaching for centuries, reinforcing certain identity values, patriarchy, racial differences, and sexism, not only within the ancient record of history, but also within our own culture in the present. As a female Asian American, my experience exploring Latin and Greek has taught me that if you don't fit the narrative of whom classics has been built and taught to cater to, you lose part of your own identity by conforming to what classics reinforces. Classics, as a selective field, chooses to reinforce certain identity values. Emily Wilson's awareness to acknowledge the distance she feels as a female translator in a field dominated by male authors, translators, readers, and learners struck me as I considered my own classics journey. I carry that sentence with me every time I read classical literature. If we don't acknowledge the problematic nature of classics, we risk losing the field, as seen in the Capitol riots and weaponizing the field, leading to a language and culture that will truly become dead and unusable. Not only will we lose an entire discipline, but we lose the momentum from the motion of redefining the classics identity, as modernizing America's classics goes far beyond the discipline and aids us in addressing further issues within contemporary society.